Hello and welcome back to our Meet the Analyst series here at Bell Direct. I'm Grady Wolf, Market Analyst at Bell Direct. This is our part 2 video with Dr. Tara Speranza, Healthcare Analyst at Bell Potter, covering a few different stocks that she analyses and puts obviously ratings and price targets on with Bell Potter. Now, Dr. Tara, we've talked about a few stocks already. Now we'll dive into the next few today.
So FDA approval for the first live microbial therapeutic by Ferring's happened last year. What does this mean for the sector and for especially for Microba in 2023?
Yeah, okay, so this is a really good question. Ferring had submitted to the FDA a biologic license application for their drug called Rebiota, and this is a fecal biotherapeutic, so a single strain organism that they've taken and grown up from a healthy human that they now place back into those that have got a particular disease that causes terrible diarrhea and stomach upset and can be deadly in children, called C. difficile. So Ferring has had their new biotherapeutic approved, first one approved as a proper therapeutic drug. And it was really interesting because I think there was quite a race on. There are a number of companies looking to treat C. difficile in particular. Ferring got there first, and there are a few still in the race actually, so it's quite a large indication, not so much in Australia, but in African countries, but also in the US. So this was really, really good because no other company has ever had a biotherapeutic approved, so that's a single microbial strain approved to put back into the gut. Now, Microba have two components to their business. One of them is testing, so we can talk about that in a moment, but the other part is this live biotherapeutics that we're talking about, similar to Ferring's drug. Microba are not looking to treat C. difficile. So the difference here is that Microba are much earlier stage, so we haven't seen them put any of their microbial therapeutics into humans just yet, although we're hoping that within the next month or two we'll start to see phase 1 trials. They're still very early, in my opinion, a little bit early to be putting that into the evaluation, which I haven't done just yet, but got a keen eye on it, and I really like looking at all their data that comes through. They've got some mouse data for 2 indications, one being IBD or bowel syndrome, so irritable bowel syndrome, and the other one that they're looking at the moment is to determine whether or not one of their microbiome therapeutics can actually improve patients' responses to some of those immuno-oncology drugs that I talked about before, like Keytruda, for example. So a lot of people don't respond to them, and Microba have a theory from data that they have that perhaps that has a little bit to do with our microbiome. So still a long way off for the biotherapeutics for Microba, but very interesting and positive that we've had a first FDA approval in that type of drug treatment.
Yeah, so hit the ground running.
Yes.
It's very exciting. Now, they have a strategic partnership with Sonic Healthcare. Can you tell us a bit about this, what's involved and how good this is for the company?
Yeah, so I said that there are 2 parts to this company, one being this looking at clinical testing of biotherapeutics, and the second is the testing. So this is a test that Microba have. You take a sample from a patient or from yourself, etc., and you send it usually via one of Microba's distribution partners, and then it gets analysed by the platform that Microba have developed. And this is probably the world's leading platform in terms of determining the microbial or genetic makeup of your microbiome, the DNA in your gut of all the microbes, and you can compare it kind of to healthy patients, and they have a huge database of how this of different microbial genetics, and so we can determine if your gut health is good or bad, or where it might be going wrong, and what kind of thing might help. So that's the testing part of Microba, and that's where actually any of their revenues are currently coming in. So signing with Sonic means that they've signed up with one of the world's biggest pathology testing and diagnostics companies. Sonic will take them not just throughout Australia, but also throughout the US and North America, and really what I like about this is the most important things is that Sonic have access to all of the general practitioners. So now you go into your doctor's office, they're going to drop down their menu to see which test to send you off for. All of a sudden, Microba's test is going to be on.
Wow.
So that has really ramped up my sales and pushed me from a hold to a buy.
Yes.
So I think this is a terrific partnership. Sonic took a 20% or almost 20% equity stake in the company, Microba, and provided them with an $18 million initial capital for that equity stake.
Wow.
They're also providing Microba with their expertise. So one of their medical directors is now on the scientific and advisory board of Microba. Another really big gain for the company, I think.
Well, with Sonic's backing, it's kind of one thing that everyone looks for in the healthcare industry, right?
Yeah.
So does this play into, we're talking about revenue, you expect revenues to triple by 2025. Does that kind of play into it? What's
Absolutely,
the driver?
yeah. So Sonic being one of the main drivers in terms of their distribution of the testing, but not just that, Microba have, in my opinion, been one of the most impressive companies in terms of signing and executing distribution partnerships. So they've got a huge amount of the work covered now, including non-exclusive coverage, which means that they can have more than one company distributing the tests in co-localized geography. And it usually takes about 2 years for us to see the ramp up in revenue from the signing and execution of the deal to revenue income. So this is why 2025 is going to be the big year. So just to remind you that we're talking about revenues from about the 4 to the 14 million or 5 to 15. So these are not huge revenues just yet, and not quite taking the company to profitability yet.
So talking about profitability, what will it take for Microba to become profitable?
Well, I actually think Microba can become profitable without the biotherapeutic asset. However, it won't be the biggest year-on-year growth in terms of these sort of biotech stocks. So I think in the future a really huge or enormous ramp up in profits would be off the back of an approval of one of their biotherapeutics. Having said that, just want to reiterate that I do think this company can become profitable without that, with testing alone.
Yeah, so it's one to watch at the moment, and you have a buy rating on it. So very exciting for Microba. Now, our third stock we're discussing today is Monash IVF. It's one of the ones I love talking about on the different media outlets we talk about it on. What does 2023 look like for Monash IVF?
Yeah, look, I like Monash as well. Monash, I think, is going to have quite a good 2023. We've seen some very big increases in IVF cycle numbers across Australia during the pandemic. So at the very start of 2020, we saw a little bit of a drop-off, but that's because all non-essential medical appointments were closed as lockdown occurred. But then IVF was allowed to open back up again. And I think we saw a huge increase in IVF cycle numbers in Australia and across the world in the pandemic as people reassessed their lives, reassessed their priorities, bought houses in the country and decided to focus on family. And we saw huge increases in cycle numbers. So whilst the year-on-year growth may not have been quite as big from 22 to what I think 23, we aren't seeing any drop-off in cycle numbers so far from the Medicare numbers that I've looked at to date. So 6% growth is my prediction for FY23, although I think that's going to keep increasing to 15% year-on-year growth in FY24, and we can get into that in a moment.
Yeah, talking about growth, there's a lot of kind of priority and emphasis and knowledge around the world of people kind of reassessing where they're at in life, and women are working longer and there's more need for these services. How have these programs, or how has this demand really factored into your weighting of the company?
Yeah, look, I agree 100%. I think there are a lot of what I call worthwhile reasons that women put off having children until a little bit later. However, that does make it, from a biological standpoint, a little bit more difficult to fall pregnant naturally. As well as that, we have a number of other reasons that people can't fall pregnant. So all of these definitely factor into my model. And in particular, talking about the other things besides just putting off having children, we understand a lot more about genetics these days and what kinds of genetic impact has on fertility. And of course, we can do a lot more screening. And the really interesting thing is that this year, in November 23, the government is bringing in a new Medicare rebate for what we call carrier tests, so genetic carrier tests. So that's where mum and dad can both get tested before trying to have babies. So not just testing the embryo after the embryo's been created, but testing mum and dad pre having the child or undergoing IVF. And this will allow people to make a decision about whether or not they start IVF sooner or if they start at all. So up to now, that test costs anywhere between $600 and $2,000, so that's actually prohibitive for a lot of people. With Medicare rebate, that's going to change everything, and we're going to see, I think, a big uptick in numbers.
Yeah. Now, the company it's not just IVF. They have egg freezing, they have sperm bank, they have so many different divisions and X-ray, everything really to do with reproduction. Now, what is the key driver of revenue and growth, and has this changed over the years?
Yes, so ultrasound is the other really big part of the group's revenue, but none of these add up to the types of revenue that full cycles bring in. So you're quite right. They do egg freezing and sperm banking and other fertility treatments. But yes, full fertility cycles or full IVF or IVF ICSI cycles are the real revenue makers for this company. So what drives that though is the number of doctors that they have on staff. So the number of doctors has changed quite a lot throughout, say, the last decade. In 2017, they lost a group of really popular doctors down in Melbourne. They also lost another very popular female doctor down in Melbourne, and we saw immediate impacts on revenue the following year. What is good about Monash, though, I think, is that they've recovered those numbers again, and so we're really getting back up to the pre-2017 cycle numbers, and that's driving the revenue. Another thing to point out, though, is whilst I said that the cycle numbers really overshadow things like ultrasound, ultrasound is important, and we saw ultrasound was stopped altogether with the lockdowns across Australia. And also we had a shortage in the number of sonographers in the past couple of years. Both of those things have recovered, so I do think, even though it's small, it will have quite a good impact on our revenue for the company in the next year or two.
Now, the company is facing legal action from 2019 and 2020. What impact has this had on the company so far, and is it set to have any further impact moving forward?
Yeah, so I think that, this is the sort of thing that gets beaten up in the media a little bit. This was some specific test outcomes that were developed by a doctor who isn't at the company anymore. Of course, the ramifications on the females is not good, and I'm not suggesting that, but the company will be covered by professional indemnity insurance, which should cover any of the costs of this going forward.
Beautiful. And now we're talking about this off camera. Just about the MasterChef effect. Now, there is a TV show coming out about IVF in Australia with some people telling their journeys and stories. And what impact do you think this might have, if any, or tailwinds, headwinds for Monash?
Yeah, look, usually I'd be a little bit cynical about this kind of thing, but we have seen the MasterChef effect. Everybody suddenly became a foodie. So whether or not the fact that it's coming in conjunction with the full Medicare coverage for that genetic carrier testing, I think the dual effect of those is that we might see an increase in number of IVF cycles in Australia, which will positively flow through to Monash.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time and space to be in, and watching how Monash progresses over 2023. Dr. Tara Speranza, thank you so much for your time today. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode as much as I did filming it.
Thanks so much, Grady. That was great.